CDS, credit derivative swaps, which was at the root they were very much at the root of the crisis of AIG. They were ways to take risk out of the balance sheet of banks, and they were perfectly legal, and they reduced, since you are insuring your assets, you as a commercial bank were allowed to reduce the amount of capital you were required by the regulators. There were loopholes in the international supervisions. Many of the operations were done through other countries, through London, which I wouldn't blame on globalization. I mean, this thing we have seen in the 60s. Someone remembers the euro-dollar market? People were very worried about this unregulated thing growing and growing. It was just a way through which American banks could offer their clients deposits in dollars on a European branch of an American bank without paying reserve requirements. There were loopholes probably on the originate and distribute model, on the regulation of this. There were loopholes perhaps on rating agencies and so on. But in the end, one has to ask the question, why were people, why were the bankers, why were the final investor taking so much risk? Why was everybody willing to go along with the numbers that we have just seen on the screen? Why all these big banks taking all this risk were AAA, they didn't pay spreads on their borrowings? Why did that happen? Why General Motors or any other firm couldn't do something like that? And it seems to me that it's hard to eliminate one piece of the answer, which is moral hazard. The widespread idea that government will intervene. I think this was also embedded in the models, not explicitly, but was implicitly embedded in the model of the rating agencies. After all, in the 1980s, the saving and loans were all bailed out by the government. The government in 1998, I mean the US government, even intervened to bail out a stupid hedge fund. Right? Mm-hmm. So why should it bail out a large investment bank, one of these 12 banks that were at the heart of the network? The other point that one should not forget is what governments were pushing for banks to take high risks. The two former government agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, well, they were rather essential for political consensus because they made it possible to securitize mortgage. They could, since there was this widespread idea that they had, and in fact ex post they had, a government guarantee they could borrow at very low rates, and therefore they made mortgages less costly. They were formidable competitors for anybody else who wanted to do this business. Let me say that the word greed in Europe is used to describe the opposite situation from that we have in the US. In the US, banks and other institutions have lended too much. In Europe, it is usual to say that bankers are greedy because they only lend money to those who already have money. They don't lend enough. So those who make this sort of criticism should also make up their mind of what bankers should do. Certainly, I think that it is difficult to deny that there were problems with the markets. I think it is really difficult to deny that. And I think it has always been recognized by economists and by anyone, that markets have a difficulty in identifying systemic risk. I can see the risk that my bank is running into. It is difficult to see a risk which is systemic, and there may be behavioral aspects to this. If I'm a manager of a bank, I feel safe in doing what everybody else is doing, because if I collapse because the system, the world collapses, it's not my fault. If I collapse because I am taking too little risk, and this is the answer that all investment bankers give you, if I didn't do this thing, my share price would collapse, and I might lose my job. Well, if I collapse while everybody else makes profit, I run into trouble. But after all, systemic risk is a very reason. Let me just conclude with this remark on which we can elaborate. It's a very reason why we created a big bureaucracy for regulation and supervision, central banks, etc., etc. And all this supervision, all the supervisory authority, although Federal Reserve, I think, is one of the best institutions that we have around the world in many senses, and also other central banks, but there was a miserable failure. They didn't see this very high risk that the banks and other institutions were taking. They didn't foresee anything. They obviously couldn't act. So now they may be very useful, these institutions, to bail us out, all of us, out of the system. I hope that this will not prepare for the next crisis.